Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video, and today we've got to talk for a bit about the Los Angeles Clippers. As I'm recording this, they just went ahead and exited the playoffs, losing in Game 6 to the Mavericks. Something that isn't necessarily surprising. I picked the Mavericks to win in 7 games. I know a lot of people did. They got it done a game sooner than I was expecting, and credit to the Mavs, they dominated the Clippers in Games 5 and 6. In Game 5, they gave the Clippers their worst loss in playoff franchise history, and in Game 6 here, they were up by 20 at multiple points. They were tied at halftime, but in the second half, it was just never close, win by 13, to move on to face Oklahoma City, a series that, as a Thunder fan, I'm really excited about. You know, Shai versus Luka, two great offensive and pretty solid defensive teams. It's going to be a lot of fun. There, of course, will be a series preview video for that coming out before Game 1 goes live. But for the moment, we need to talk about what this means for the Clippers because there are, in my opinion, drastic consequences for this playoff exit. I'll give them some credit. They did keep this series close for a while. They were tied 2-2 going into Game 5 back in LA, although one of those wins required them nearly blowing a 30-point lead, so a little bit shaky, but a win's a win in the playoffs. They just couldn't do anything in the final 2 games. Harden, who was the best player in this series for the first few matchups, was just terrible in the last 2 games, 7 points on 2 of 12 in Game 5, and in Game 6, just 16 points on 5 of 16 shooting. Paul George had a few good games in this series, like he had 33 in Game 4, but shot terribly in the final 2 games and didn't hit 20 points in either contest. The team as a whole was slow. They looked outmatched. They were not winning any of the hustle plays. They were losing on the boards a lot of the times. They just really weren't able to generate any consistent offense against this Mavs defense, and defensively were getting exposed in a lot of ways. Not to mention, Kawhi Leonard played just 2 games in this series and looked awful before missing the final 3 games of the matchup, the second year in a row where he's left mid-series. In fact, it's now been 3 years in a row where the Clippers haven't even made it out of the first round. It's been 3 years since they made that conference finals appearance, the first one in franchise history back in 2021. And since they picked up Paul George and Kawhi Leonard in the 2019 offseason, that's the only time they've made the conference finals. No NBA finals appearances, not multiple conference finals, 1 conference finals. It's objectively been a failure up to this point. They mortgaged everything, all their draft picks over to Oklahoma City, including a pick that became Jalen Williams, as well as Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who just finished top 5 in MVP last year. He's going to finish top 3 this year. If you gave them a chance to go back and do it again, I'm sure they would, because getting Kawhi Leonard and Paul George is a massive deal, but it just hasn't gotten anywhere near to plan for what this era was supposed to be, especially when the team that you're trying to get out of the shadow of, and the Lakers, who are in your same city and have always been bigger, have won a championship in their new era with LeBron and AD, and things feel like they're kind of crumbling over there, but at least they went ahead and got a ring, made multiple conference finals. The Clippers have only been there once and still cannot get to a finals in their franchise history. It feels like every year we go through this same cycle where the Clippers come into the year considered championship contenders. They made some big moves in the offseason. It's like, hey, they've got these stars. If they can just stay healthy, they can compete with anybody. And I've fallen victim to it before. I believe going into last season, I picked the Clippers to win the NBA Finals. Maybe it was the season prior, but I've definitely done that before and picked them to be in the conference finals a number of times. They've just never found a way to get it done, to keep their guys on the court. They have failed so far, and they may have now run out of chances, because the more I take a look at this, I really believe that the Clippers' window, whatever it was to compete for a championship, has completely shut, and this era is coming to a sudden end. The most immediate concern is that while Kawhi Leonard is re-signed long-term, the other 2 members of your big 3 are not. PG and James Harden are both unrestricted free agents, going into what is a very weak free agent class where a bunch of teams have all this money, they're going to throw them the bag. I wouldn't be surprised if Paul George in particular walked. I think Harden is more likely to stay, but he's also very finicky. I mean, he could leave, but Paul George is the guy I'm really looking at as someone that could not be in a Clipper uniform going into next season. He said that he likes being a Clipper. He's from that area, so it makes sense that he would want to be there. But if the rumors are true that the Clippers may not be willing to offer him a max contract, and some other team in a better situation for him to win does, I would be shocked if he didn't at least consider that other offer. Like Philadelphia, for example, is a team where they're going to have a bunch of money. They've got a young rising star in Tyrese Maxey, Embiid, who is an MVP caliber player. They might just be missing that third guy. That could be a good spot for him amongst a bunch of other teams that are going to have money and looking to spend it some way. And again, what is a weak free agency class, I think he's going to get a lot of big time offers. The Clippers will probably match it and probably keep him, but it's not guaranteed, which is scary for this squad. And even if you do maintain your big 3 and keep the roster intact somewhat, the more that I look at it, this team is falling apart at the seams. There was one point in the season around late December to early January where the Clippers were the hottest team in the NBA. There were people picking them to win the Western Conference, saying that if there was anybody that could take down the Nuggets in the West, it was them. Harden, Kawhi, Paul George built up a ton of chemistry. They were really clicking. They were defending really well. Harden was this amazing facilitator who had some really efficient shooting. Kawhi Leonard was playing hyper-efficient two-way basketball like he always does and was actually staying on the court, which was big for them. Paul George was taking a bit of a backseat in some of those nights, but there were still those nights where he popped off and he was still playing at an all-star level. The supporting cast was stepping up. Tyronn Lue had kind of figured things out. They seemed unstoppable and like a real threat in the West. Then they completely forgot how to play basketball, very quickly plummeted down the standings, going from a team that at one point was the sole possessor of the number 1 seed to a squad that was pretty solidified in that 4 spot. And even for a moment, it seemed like there was a chance they could fall lower before eventually they did secure home court advantage. But a lot of confidence in the team was very quickly lost by pretty much anybody. Harden started to struggle. He wasn't defending the way he was at the beginning of his Clippers tenure, and there were less and less great scoring nights. Paul George was very hit or miss. Kawhi Leonard was still good, but couldn't do enough to lift them over the top most nights. Not to mention the injuries eventually, like they always do with the Clippers, popped up towards the end of the season. Kawhi Leonard missed the entire month of April with a knee injury, and then, like we talked about, was not present for most of their first-round series, and even when he was on the court, very clearly a shell of himself. Just like every year, the Clippers fell apart, and again, it's most of the time due to these injuries, which I don't think are going anywhere at this point. If they have not had a healthy run since 2020, the first year where they were put together, and it's been 4 playoff runs since then, I don't think it's going to happen at this point, especially not with these guys getting older. Kawhi is unfortunately hurt every season at this point, and he's heading into his mid-30s. I don't know if he has any sustained dominant runs left in him, especially not over the course of a full season and the playoffs. Maybe if he rests a lot of the regular season and then plays in the playoffs, he has a chance, but they've tried that before. I just don't know if Kawhi Leonard's body is going to let him play at the insane level that we've seen him at for the past few years anymore. Paul George was able to thankfully avoid injury this season, but I don't know how often that's going to happen with his track record. Last year, he missed their entire series against the Suns, and even if he's healthy, he's not quite the player he used to be. He lacks a lot of the burst he used to have. Now he relies a lot more on really tough shot making, and he's one of the best shot makers in the world, so there are still those nights where he looks unstoppable, but when he's not being superhuman, it gets tough for him and the Clippers to generate offense. I think he can still be great as a third guy, but I'm starting to wonder if he can be a consistent second option for a championship level team anymore. Harden was great for a lot of the year, and credit to him, he really did step up at the beginning of the playoffs here, but for the second half of the regular season and the end of this series, we saw a lot of the inconsistencies that have plagued Harden over his recent career and really his whole career when it comes to the playoffs. That is a concern that I don't know if it's going to go away this late into his playing career. Plus, he's getting older. I think he's going to continue to regress. Even if he's still really good, you need Harden to be at a high level, especially if you're going to deal with injuries to make up for some of the flaws in the roster. And he himself has injury concerns of his own, avoided them this season. But between Kawhi, PG, and Harden all having those constant issues, how often are you ever going to have all three of them on a court for a singular playoff run? All three of these guys are getting older, they're injury prone, and the team as a whole has this concern too. This is the oldest roster in the entire NBA. PJ Tucker is 38. Russell Westbrook is 35. Mason Plumlee is 34. Harden and Paul George are both 34, with Harden turning 35 before next year, which makes me feel old even saying that. Daniel Tice is 32. Kawhi Leonard is 32. Norman Powell is 30. Like, their youngest players that are actually contributors to this rotation are Zubats and Terrence Mann, who are 27, and Amir Coffey, who's 26. There is nobody who plays for this team continuously that's 25 or younger, and none of these young talents that they do have on the roster are going to come and save them. Like Bones Highland, Kai Jones, Kobe Brown, Brandon Boston could all develop into fun players, but none of them feel anywhere close to being able to contribute on a championship level roster anytime soon. You might be saying, oh, okay, well, they can just make trades. They can upgrade the roster. They can get younger. It's not that easy. They owe the Thunder their pick or a pick swap with OKC all the way until 2027. And I don't know if you've been seeing what the Thunder have been doing as a Thunder fan. I know I have, but they're one of the best teams in the NBA in one of the early stages of their rebuild. They're in the second round. The first year that they made it back to the playoffs, they were just the 1 seed. They're going to get better and better. By 2027, they'll probably still be a 60-ish win team. So those pick swaps are not going to be valuable at all if the Clippers are trying to trade anything on draft night, and they have to wait till those those times to even make those picks available. They owe Philly a couple of picks and swaps for the Harden trade. If I did my math right, they don't control or own one of their own first-round picks until 2030. Between this lack of any real draft capital and no young players that are super interesting to opposing teams, I would imagine, they don't have any real trade bait. I don't know how they substantially upgrade this roster at all. This feels like the squad that they're going to be stuck with. And with everybody getting older and older, guys on their second half of their careers and regressing, you're just going to continue to fall behind. Even if you keep PG and Harden, you stay healthy for a full season, how are you going to compete with a rapidly improving Western Conference when all your guys are regressing? Whether it's Oklahoma City, who's only going to get better and better, the Denver Nuggets don't feel like they're going anywhere anytime soon. The Minnesota Timberwolves have been fantastic, and Anthony Edwards is only getting better in his own right. Dallas, with Luka, who's going to continue to improve and is already at an MVP level. Young teams like a Memphis, for example, who are going to be back next season and better than ever. Houston, if they trade for a star, and even if they don't, they're progressing. The Spurs, if they ever get Wemby some help. The Jazz are apparently interested in trading for a star. Teams like the Pelicans that can make some moves. Phoenix, even though they're also on the rapid decline, like they're still a good team at the moment. I don't know how you beat all of these squads. The Clippers, to me, it doesn't feel like they've got any shot going to next season of competing with or without this big three still in town. To me, it makes sense to admit defeat and just go ahead and rebuild. I know they don't have their own future picks, but maybe Kawhi still has some value out there. You can trade some of your role players, maybe try and draw up some type of sign and trade stuff for your free agents. They could find some way to recoup some of their assets. It's going to take a long time to get back to relevance, but it feels like they should start it sooner than later, because if they continue to pour more and more assets into something that is very clearly not going to work, they're only going to regret it down the line. But then at the same time, there's a big issue because they're opening a new arena. Like next season, if you didn't know, they're not going to be playing in the same arena as the Lakers anymore. There's a brand new Intuit Dome that is all theirs. This is the Clippers' home arena, 100% LA Clippers. If they go in there with a team that doesn't have Kawhi, Paul George, or James Harden, if they're going into a rebuild that is going to last for like 8 years, how are you going to sell tickets to pay for this new arena that you just put together? So that's a big reason why I think there's no way they rebuild this thing. They just keep it together. But just from a straight up team building logistical sense in a vacuum, that feels like you're delaying the inevitable. You're just wasting everybody's time. Maybe I regret this somehow, that the Clippers put things together and do go on to compete at a high level next year. But to me, I think it's genuinely over for them. And it's just a matter of time until they themselves realize this. Maybe they never come to this conclusion and we watch Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, and James Harden retire as Clippers, with Kawhi never getting another ring after Toronto and PG and Harden retiring ringless, which would really suck for two modern legends of the game. But I think it's just the outcome at this point. Unless they walk in free agency, that's probably how it's going to go down. With Russell Westbrook too, one of my favorite players of all time, of course, as a Thunder fan, I want to see him get a ring. It's not going to happen in LA. Maybe it happens somewhere else. But at this point, I just don't know if he's going to get one in his career. This whole Clippers, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George thing, if they could go back and do it again, I imagine they probably would. Maybe they try to convince Kawhi a little bit harder that, hey, you should just team up with the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander guy instead. But imagine Kawhi Leonard says no to that. I think they still do make the Paul George trade. They would try it again in an alternate reality. But in this one, it is a failure. Sure, they made the first conference finals in their franchise history, which is great, but not making or winning a single NBA Finals when you gave up one of the biggest trade packages in NBA history to make this thing happen, and it's going to send you into like an 8-year rebuild. In the end, it is objectively a failure, and to me, this is the end of the Clippers. With all that being said, those are my thoughts on Los Angeles at the moment. Let me know what your opinions are. Do you agree with me that this is their end? Do you think that I'm wrong, that they can still have something in them? They can make some deals. Maybe you just need one more year of Kawhi, Paul George, and James Harden together. They can make this thing work. Would love to hear your thoughts on this team. They're one of the most interesting teams heading into the offseason out of anybody, and there are a lot of teams that have very interesting off seasons. I think as the playoffs go on and we don't have playoff basketball to cover every single day, I'm going to make a lot of videos talking about some more of the interesting teams. Like, I think the Sixers have a really interesting offseason ahead of them. I think Miami does. Phoenix, of course, does as well. So let me know which teams you want to hear me talk about. And of course, there still will be constant playoff coverage here on the channel. But for the moment, I do appreciate y'all watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future videos. I'll see y'all later. Real one, say it back.